On today's show, we're looking at the all-time fantasy teams for three squads: the Orlando Magic, the Philadelphia 76ers, and the Phoenix Suns. Michael Bolton.
Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily fantasy basketball podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd and I am the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com and at Yahoo Sports Australia, and you can find me on Twitter as always at redrock_bball and on Instagram at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Today we are looking at the all-time fantasy teams for three squads: the Magic, as I said, the Sixers, and the Phoenix Suns. So let's talk about that Orlando Magic squad, which looks pretty good. There's quite a few elite fantasy guys, especially big men, on that team. So let's take a look at it now. At point guard, no surprise, Penny Hardaway comes in. It is the 1996 season for Penny. That's his third year in the league. He was the third-ranked player that season, and unfortunately, injuries robbed us. He only had one season where he was really even at a similar level after this one, and that was the 96-97 season, and then that was the year he first got injured, and then things weren't that great for Penny after that, unfortunately. But in this season, he averaged 22, 4, and 7, over 2 steals. He hit a 3 a game, elite percentages, 50, or at least elite field goal, 51% from the field, and 77% from the line. He could have been a consistent top 10 fantasy player for 10 or so years, but unfortunately, we know what happened, and the knee injuries robbed us of what could have been a stellar career. At shooting guard, it is the 03 season of Tracy McGrady. In 2002-2003, McGrady was the 5th ranked player. He was second on a per-game basis. He averaged a whopping 32 points per game, over 6 rebounds, over 5 assists, over 1.5 steals, got to the line 10 times and hit him at 80%. Massive numbers from McGrady, and like Penny Hardaway, injuries had an impact on his career. Now, he was able to have a longer peak, a longer prime, but it wasn't a huge amount of time. We're talking about from age 21 through to like 26 or 25 when injuries really took a toll on McGrady. But big numbers for him for this, especially this 4-year period in Orlando. The numbers were fantastic for Tracy. At small forward, it is Hedo Turkoglu who comes in there, the 07-08 year for Turkoglu. He was the 24th ranked player that season. Really sort of just did a bit of everything. Got rebounds, got assists, shot 40% from 3, two threes a game, 20 points, 83% from the line. A real Rudy Gay type of a line, a real lower level Jason Tatum sort of a fantasy line. Just nice numbers across the board without the high level scoring of someone like a Tatum. So he was a really good player for a couple of years. When he went to Toronto, things did fall off quite a bit for him, and even his second go-around in Orlando, he wasn't quite the same player. But Turkoglu was a real early round stud for a couple of years there in fantasy. A guy that played alongside Hedo in those Orlando Magic finals teams. Rashard Lewis is our power forward, the 08 version of Lewis. There, he had some really strong seasons for the Seattle Supersonics as well. He was the 23rd player in this first year in Orlando, 23rd ranked player. He averaged 18 and 5. He gave us really good free throw percentage. He hit 2.8 triples, which was a massive amount back in those days. A really strong stretch four. Really, I won't say invented the stretch four term, but absolutely one of the pioneers, as is another bloke that we're going to talk about a little bit later. If you want to talk stretchiness, we're not going to be talking about this guy, and that is the starting center. There's plenty of options they could have had. They could have had Dwight Howard. They could have had Nikola Vucevic, who's an excellent fantasy player, but of course...
Big Shaq.
Yes, Shaquille O'Neal. Despite the horrible free throws, in 93-94, Shaq was the 5th ranked player, despite having a Z score for his free throws of negative 6.15. So, in all honesty, he was the number 1 player that year. He averaged 29 and 13, 2.9 blocks, 60% from the field on almost 20 attempts, which is an absolutely massive amount. Free throws were always the issue with Shaq, but his numbers were unbelievable. He was basically this top 2, top 1 fantasy guy in a punt free throw situation for many seasons. Of course, he would go on and do similar things with the Lakers, but this was his second season. This was his best overall fantasy year, where he ranked 5th overall. His free throws would somehow get worse as his career went on. That's our starting five. At backup point guard, Darrell Armstrong. We talked about him one season with the Pelicans in the last show, but his majority of his career was with the Magic in the 2000 season. That's his best year. He was the 12th ranked player in that season. It was the 99 season where he was the 7th ranked player, but that was only 50 games played in that year. Armstrong put up some really good numbers, good assists, high steals, hit good threes, scored pretty well, and played a solid amount of minutes. At backup shooting guard, it is Nick Anderson, the 94-95 season from Anderson. In that year, he was the 28th ranked player. He averaged 15 points. He hit a ton of threes as well. Nice assists from the wing, 1.6 steals. Yeah, pretty solid efficiency numbers. Nothing spectacular, but he finds himself on this team, as does Dennis Scott, who was his teammate in the 94-95 and 95-96, and plenty of other seasons. He played the majority of his career for the Magic. Scott. In 95-96, he was the 24th ranked player. He averaged 17 points. He hit over 3 threes that year at a 43% margin. He was at 43 the year before that. This, of course, was the time when the NBA shortened that three-point line, but he was still a strong shooter in other seasons as well. But realistically, it was those threes and a pretty strong free throw percentage that got Scott the fantasy value that he did have. And I talked about stretch big men. Ryan Anderson is one of the first names that should come to mind because in the 2011-2012 season, he was the 28th ranked player. And if you look at 9-cat values, which are bullshit, but if you look at them, he was the 8th ranked player in that season. He averaged 16 points with 2.7 triples. He sort of really broke out that year after being a backup the years prior. He gave us 8 rebounds and he did absolutely nothing defensively. He had a poor field goal percentage, but he hit a ton of threes. He grabbed boards, he scored, and he had a good free throw percentage. So a real breakout star that year who would never be able to get back to that level of play. And then your backup center is Nikola Vucevic, the last season's Vucevic. He was the 10th ranked player. He averaged 21 and 12, a steal, 1.1 blocks, 52 and 79. Now, Dwight Howard is the better player. And so he's in this rotation. We're going to talk about that in a second. But he is supremely hurt by the free throw percentage. So the overall value that Vooch had last season was actually higher than Dwight Howard. Now let's talk Dwight Howard. His best fantasy season was the 10-11 year where he was the 12th ranked player. In that season, he averaged 23 and 14 with 2.4 blocks on 59% shooting. Unfortunately, he shot 59% from the free throw line as well on a massive 12 attempts for a negative 6.26 free throw impact. That wasn't his worst free throw impact. His year with the Lakers was worse. Negative 10 from free throws. 49% on 10 attempts is a stupendously bad season for free throw percentage. But of course, you're punting it with Dwight. There's no way around it. At point guard, Scott Skiles, one of the worst coaches in recent NBA history. In the 92-93 season, he did set the record for most assists in a game. I think he had 24 assists. No, 30 assists. Sorry, I'm getting my numbers mixed up. He had 30 assists in a game. 92-93 for Skilesy, he was the 22nd ranked player. He averaged almost 10 assists that season with 15 points and hit a 3. And was an elite free throw shooter as well. And then the last spot on this 13-man rotation is Steve Franchise, 04-05, the 19th ranked player, 21 points, 7 assists, 6 rebounds, good free throws, just a really sort of solid second-round player who did burn out pretty quickly after some strong seasons in Houston and that 1 year in Orlando. Let's move on to the next team we're going to look at, and that is the Philadelphia 76ers. Lots of fantasy value there, but their starting point guard, and I did finagle this a little bit because this guy had an absolute monster of a year. Dana Barros, the 04-05 season. Sorry, try again. The 94-95 season for Barros. He was the 4th ranked player. One of those years that just completely came out of the blue. 21 points, 2.4 triples, 41 minutes, 7.5 assists, 1.8 steals, 49 and 90 as his percentages. An absolute elite player who would then go on to be the 94th ranked player the year after that. Just a staggering leap out of nowhere. He would end up in Boston the year after that, but this was by far the best season he ever had in his career. The shooting guard, Allen Iverson. Now, I know Iverson is designated as a point guard. He is not this big-time distributor, and I think him playing off Dana Barros would make sense, even though it is an extremely small backcourt. But I wanted to get both of these guys in the starting lineup because they had some really tremendous seasons. 04-05 was the best season from Iverson. He was the 5th ranked player in that year. He averaged 31, 4 and 8 with 2.4 steals and 84% from the line on 11 attempts. He didn't hit a huge amount of threes, just 1.4, but big scoring numbers from Iverson to jump into this all-time starting lineup. And then, of course, we go back into the history of the NBA a little bit more for the starting small forward, and that is Dr. J, Julius Erving, the 80-81 season. He was the number 1 ranked player in 80-81. 25 points, 8 rebounds, 2.1 steals, and 1.8 blocks. So not only was he a high-volume scorer, but he was almost giving us 2 steals and 2 blocks per game, doing it with elite percentages. Just an absolute stud for many years. I think we forget, we know Dr. J from the cool nickname, we know him from the dunks, but these numbers are absolutely ridiculous from Julius Erving. The year before that, he actually averaged 27 points per game with those high steal and high block numbers again, but he played the 4 extra games in 80-81, and that's what pushed that season into the mix. At power forward, speaking of ridiculous, a 6'5", who, let's be honest, probably isn't even 6'5", power forward Charles Barkley, the 87-88 season from Barkley. He was the 3rd ranked player in that year. 28 and 12, 1.3 steals, 1.3 blocks, 3 assists, 59%. He shot only 28% from 3, but he was just an absolute beast, super athletic, unbelievable rebounder for a short ass who realistically is probably like a point guard, shooting guard size player in today's NBA. Unbelievable stuff from Barkley. We're going to talk about him again with the other team that we're doing on today's show. At center, Moses Malone gets the nod. That is the 82-83 version of Malone, the 8th ranked player in that season. It wasn't his best year. He did have better seasons playing for Houston Rockets earlier on, but this is his best season for Philadelphia. He averaged 25 and 15, over 2 blocks, over a steal, 50 and 76, but it's really that rebounding number from Malone that puts him as an elite fantasy player. Backup guard situation, Mo Cheeks played the majority of his career for the Sixers. Great nickname. Great name, Cheeks. The 5th ranked player in 85-86. He averaged 15 points, but it was 9 assists and 2.5 steals, plus 54 and 84. They're the real strengths of Cheeks' game. He was a decent assist guy. Never got to this level again. Never a high scorer. This was the highest season he had in terms of scoring. Actually, that's not true. The year after that, he averaged 0.2 points per game more. So never a high scorer, never a 3-point shooter, but a high assist guy, a high steals guy, and a high efficiency guy is why Cheeks is in the mix here. Now, when I talked about this guy a while ago, I screwed up his name. So I'm going to try it and make sure it's right. Hersey Hawkins. It always just looks like Hershey. It's not Hershey, it's Hersey. Hersey Hawkins, terrible name. Make it Hershey. 90-91 season for Hersey. He was the 10th ranked player in that season. He averaged 22 points in 39 minutes. He didn't do a huge amount else apart from steals, where he got 2.2 of them and was 87% from the line. But a big-time scorer with big-time steal numbers. Hersey Hawkins slides in, as does Andre Iguodala, the 06-07 version of Iguodala. He was the 13th ranked player. He played 40 minutes a game. Never got to 20 points per game, only averaged 18 here, but almost 6 rebounds, almost 6 assists, 2 steals, 82%. And the fact that he shot 82% from the line on 7 attempts is wild. When you go to look at his season in Denver, 57%. The Warriors, 59%. Philadelphia at the end of his career, 62%. What happened? Why did he become an absolutely ass-trash free throw shooter? He was really good at it. The one thing he didn't lose was his ability to pass and defend. Steal numbers are always really good, but he was an absolute early round, second round stud for fantasy at the beginning of his career. At backup power forward, it is Tobias Harris. Now, most of this season was as a part of the LA Clippers. We have to have some sort of cut-off, and the season where he ends, the team where he ends the season is the team that it counts for. He was the 21st ranked player last season. Harris, he averaged 20 points, 8 rebounds with 0.6 steals, just a decent volume scorer with good efficiency numbers. And then his teammate is your backup center, is the process, Joel Embiid, who was last season the 13th ranked player despite playing just 64 games. He averaged 28 and 14. He gave us almost 2 blocks. He shot 48 and 80%. Per game, he was the 7th ranked player. He's obviously really good, and it's the games played that's always held him back so far in his NBA career. And the last 3 guys in this rotation, Jeff Hornacek, 92-93. Hornacek put up good numbers for the Jazz. He put up good numbers for the Suns. And his one season in Philadelphia, guess what? He put up good numbers. He was the 10th ranked player. He averaged 19 points, 7 assists, shot 39% from 3. really strong efficiency numbers, got 1.7 steals. He was just a really, really good player. He was a terrible coach, but he was a really, really good player. And then Ben Simmons jumps in as well. The 17-18 rookie season from Simmons. He was the 15th ranked player as a rookie. 16, 8 and 8, 1.7 steals, 55%. Unfortunately, 56% from the line. He would have been a top 10 guy in a punt situation for free throw percentage as a rookie, which is ridiculous. And then the last player on this Sixers rotation, the 82-83 season for someone by the name of Andrew Toney. Why did Andrew Toney get in? Well, he hit a lot of threes. That's really what it is. 82-83, he hit 0.3 triples a game, and that's a strong amount. And he did score pretty well. I'm being unfair to Toney. He averaged almost 20 points per game. He gave us 4.5 assists and 50% shooting, but his best category was his three-point shooting, and it was 0.3 triples a game at 29%. So yeah, the three-point shot was not highly valued back in those times. Let us move on now. The last team we're going to talk about on today's show is the Phoenix Suns. Who is the starting point guard? Monster options here. Jason Kidd actually gets the nod, the 98-99 season for Kidd, because he was the number one ranked player in 98-99. He averaged 17, 7, and 11. 2.3 steals, 76 from the line. He hit a 3 a game. Just elite fantasy numbers. There's, of course, Steve Nash. There's Kevin Johnson, but they are not. They did not have as good seasons as what Kidd did in that 98-99 season for him to be the starting point guard. Big Jason Kidd. The guy I just talked about, Jeffy Hornacek, is your starting shooting guard for the Suns, 91-92. Hornacek was the 5th ranked player in that season. He averaged 20 points per game, the only time in his career. He actually gave 5 assists and 5 rebounds and 2 steals and shot 51% from the field and a blistering 44% from 3. Hornacek was an absolute fantasy stud. He was like a top 50 player for about 9 consecutive seasons, and I don't think we really look at Jeff Hornacek and go absolute fantasy stud. At small forward, this guy was a fantasy stud. Sean Marion, the 05-06 season, he was the number 1 ranked player. He was the 2nd ranked player the year after, the 3rd ranked player the year before, 3rd the year before that, 4th the year before that, 7th the year before that. Why was he so good? The 05-06 Marion averaged 22 points in 40 minutes. He hit threes. He grabbed 12 rebounds as a small forward. He got 2 steals. He gave you 1.7 blocks. Somehow he shot 53% with that shooting form, and he was 81% from the line. Just a staggering all-round contributor in fantasy, a first-round pick for about 6 or 7 years. Really, really good stuff. Things would fall off when he would go to Toronto and to Dallas, but his time in Phoenix, absolute monster numbers. We've already talked about this guy. He's the starting power forward for the Sixers. He's also the starting power forward for the all-time Suns teams. Charles Barkley, 92-93 season. He was the 3rd ranked player in this year. He averaged 26 and 12 with over 5 assists, 1.6 steals with 52 and 77 as his percentages. Almost hit a 3 per game as well. He almost did the, not the impossible, but close to the impossible, being a positive contributor in all categories. He just missed free throws where he was at 77%. Yeah, a couple extra percentage points there and he would have been a positive contributor across all categories. But Barkley, absolute stud, as is this bloke, the starting center. Yes, he played power forward for a lot of the time in Phoenix, and that is Amari Stoudemire. This was the, not the 05-06 season, sorry. This, I had that right wrong. It's 07-08 season for Stoudemire here, where he was the 3rd ranked player in 07-08. He averaged 25 and 9 with 2.1 blocks. 59% from the field is an absolute monster number. 81% from the line and almost 9 attempts. He just didn't stretch out and shoot threes. I reckon he would have in today's day and age. He could have been a 2 threes a game sort of a player. I think he had that in him. 20 and 9, 20 and 10. Good block numbers, solid steals, but absolute elite efficiency numbers for Stoudemire. The backup point guard, it's not Kevin Nash. His game wasn't all that fantasy friendly. It's Kevin Nash, big sexy. Not Steve Nash. It is, in fact, Kevin Johnson. The 88-89 season for Johnson. He was the 9th ranked player. 20 points, 4 rebounds, over 12 assists with 1.7 steals on 51 and 88% shooting. Big assist numbers, big free throw numbers, big scoring numbers from Kevin Johnson, so he gets the backup point guard job. Paul Westphal comes in next to him. The 79-80 season for Westphal, where he was the 7th ranked player, the first year the NBA brought in the three-point line. This was his last year in Phoenix. He averaged 22 points with 5 assists on 53 and 86% shooting. He also hit 0.3 triples per game, which we know is actually quite a bit back in the day. Dan Marley, he's probably more of a shooting guard than a small forward, but he's 6'6". He can handle the backup 3 position here. So this is the 92-93 version for Marley, or as I used to say when I was younger, Dan Majerle. That's because I was just reading names. We didn't really have announcers and when I heard it the first time, who the hell is this guy? Who's Marley? Anyway, Dan Marley, 92-93, the 16th ranked player. He averaged 17 points. He just was he was the guy that you realistically back in the day, that first player that you would see not have his feet on the line for the 3-point shot, would be like 3 feet, 4 feet back from the 3-point line and just bombing them from like logo type range. He hit over 2 threes per game. He averaged 17 points. He actually gave 4 assists and 1.7 steals as well as a solid enough defender. Backup power forward is Tommy Chambers. The 89-90 season for Chambers. He was the 16th ranked player in that season. In that year, he averaged 27 and 7. Massive numbers from Chambers with 50 and 86 as his percentages. Big numbers there. And your backup center is Cliff Robinson. Now, I remember Robinson more for his time in Portland, but his years in Phoenix were more productive from a fantasy point of view. In the 98-99 season, he was the 26th ranked player. He averaged 16 points with 1.2 triples as a stretch big man, 1.2 blocks, 1.5 steals. Unfortunately, he only had 4.5 rebounds, which is a pretty piss poor number, but good defensive numbers, good scoring numbers, just a solid all-round producer. Now we get to Steve Nash, who was in the 05-06 season. He finds his place here as the 8th ranked player. Again, we know he was a multi-time MVP, but he was never a guy that could be a top 5 fantasy guy, and he's still really, really good, of course. He averaged 19 points, never averaged 20 points per game. 10 assists, 0.8 steals, and that's the other thing that kept him down. Never was able to be a big steals guy, but elite percentages, 92% from the line as well, and those big assist numbers. And then some bloke by the name of Kyle Macy, 81-82. Macy was the 13th ranked player. Why? Because he hit a lot of threes, 14 points, 39% three-point shooting. Half a 3 per game, 1.7 steals on 51%, and then 90% from the free throw line. And the last guy, also a point guard, Eric Bledsoe. He didn't want to be there, but he did put up good numbers while he was there. In the 14-15 season, he was the 13th ranked player, 17, 5, and 6, good steals, okay threes, good free throws. Just, again, a really solid second, third round type of fantasy player who's that 3rd or 4th round sort of a guy now. That'll do it for today's episode, guys. That is it for Locked On Fantasy Basketball for today. I'll be back tomorrow with another show rounding out the Dynasty Watch series, looking at the San Antonio Spurs. Don't forget, subscribe. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and on YouTube. Guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.